Today, we have a fantastic scientific detective story for you. It's got all the right ingredients: a solo researcher, one of the most powerful quantum computers on the planet, and a result that was, well, it was both perfect and at the same time perfectly catastrophically wrong.
And that brings us to the central question, the real paradox at the heart of this whole thing. How can you actually break a quantum computer to make it better? It sounds completely backwards, I know. But as we're about to see, sometimes the biggest failures are actually the most important discoveries.
All right, so let's set the scene. Our story starts with one single researcher working all by himself on an experiment that is just mind-bendingly complex. He designed a circuit that was a 5 by 5 by 5 torus. The easiest way to picture this is like a 3D grid of quantum bits, qubits, where all the edges wrap around and connect to each other. It basically forms a kind of quantum donut. And he ran this thing on IBM's newest, most powerful Heron processors.
Now, here's where the mystery really kicks in. He runs the exact same experiment on two machines that are supposed to be nearly identical, one called Torino and one called Marrakesh. And the results? They were just bizarrely different. Some parts looked absolutely pristine, perfect even, but a really weird pattern of failure started to pop up. And that pattern was totally different on the two computers. And when I say different, I mean, wow. Look at this. On the Torino machine, only 3 qubits failed, and they were just scattered around randomly, which, is kind of what you'd expect. But on Marrakesh, a staggering 31 qubits were just dead, and they weren't random at all. They were all clumped together. The weirdest part? Both machines produced almost perfect entropy, which is a measure of pure randomness. So the results looked both perfect and completely broken at the same time. How is that possible? Let's just zero in on that number for a second, 31. Out of 125 qubits on the Marrakesh machine, 31 of them were completely non-functional. This wasn't some tiny little error. This was a massive, systematic failure. And that number, 31, it became the central clue in this whole detective story. The real smoking gun, though, was how they failed. On Marrakesh, these dead qubits were showing up in these tight clumps. At one point, there was a run of 7 dead qubits right in a row. The chances of that happening just by random luck? Less than 0.5%. It's statistically impossible. Something else, something systematic and hidden was going on here, and this quantum donut experiment had just accidentally stumbled right on top of it. Now, with a result this strange, this exciting, you'd think he'd rush to publish, right? I mean, what a discovery. But our researcher, working alone, took a completely different path. He felt this deep scientific obligation to try and prove himself wrong first, to falsify his own amazing finding. He was operating under this really powerful principle, which he actually wrote down in his paper, and it's really the heart and soul of good science. You don't just defend your claim, you attack it. You actively look for the thing that could prove you wrong, because that's the only real way you can ever know if you're right. So, what's a good detective to do? He came up with a plan to deconstruct his own experiment. He decided to run a series of what are called abletion studies. It's kind of like a mechanic who suspects something's wrong with an engine, so they start taking it apart piece by piece to figure out exactly which part is failing. So here were the main suspects. First, maybe it was the donut shape itself. So he randomized all the connections to see if that was the problem. Then he thought, maybe it's the error correction software. So he tried a run where he just turned it off completely. And finally, he even checked to see if there was any real quantum signal left at the end at all. Each test changed just one little thing, while keeping everything else exactly the same. It was a super rigorous, methodical investigation. And all this careful, piece-by-piece work, it led to a total plot twist. The real source of those 31 dead qubits was not at all what you might expect. This chart right here, this was the light bulb moment. When the researchers simply turned off the error correction software, the number of dead qubits on Marrakesh just plummeted. It went from 31 all the way down to 8, which is just the normal, expected background noise. The thing designed to fix the problem was actually the problem. The researcher used a single, powerful word to describe what was happening, a word he borrowed from the world of medicine: iatrogen. Iatrogenic basically means harm that is caused by the healer. Think of a treatment with side effects that are worse than the disease. The cure was causing the sickness. The system designed to fix errors was actually the primary cause of this massive failure. But it was even more subtle than that. It wasn't just the error correction on its own. The catastrophic failure only kicked in when you had this perfect storm of three things happening all at once: the unique donut-shaped circuit, the error correction software being turned on, and the specific quirks of the Marrakesh hardware. It was a toxic combination. Take away any one of those three ingredients, and the problem vanished.
And this is the moment where the whole story just flips on its head. The researcher suddenly realized his experiment hadn't failed at all. He had just misunderstood its purpose. He hadn't built a shield to protect the computer. He had built something way more valuable.
This shift in perspective is just profound. See, the original goal was to build an error shield, something to protect the qubits from noise. But what he actually created was a noise microscope, a tool that didn't hide the noise, but instead amplified it, making hidden hardware problems show up with incredible high-contrast clarity. What looked like a failed shield was actually a brilliant diagnostic tool.
So those 31 dead qubits, they weren't a bug in the experiment. They were the points of the experiment. They were the data. Those clusters of failures were actually a successful, high-resolution map of a very subtle, very harmful interference happening between his software and the computer's own internal systems.
Okay, so this is a really cool detective story about one experiment run by one researcher. But why does it matter to the rest of us? Well, as it turns out, it has some pretty huge implications for the entire future of quantum computing.
First off, it's just this incredible testament to scientific integrity. This entire discovery only happened because a single researcher was willing to doubt himself and rigorously question his own results. Second, it's a beautiful reminder that what looks like a total failure is often just a discovery seen from a different angle. And finally, and this is the really practical part, as these quantum machines get more and more complex, we desperately need better ways to diagnose them. This failed experiment accidentally invented a powerful new one. And that just leaves us with this fascinating question, one that goes way beyond quantum computers. In this story, the well-intentioned fix turned out to be the problem. It really makes you wonder, what other obvious solutions, maybe in our technology or even in our own lives, might actually be making things worse?
All right, so I want you to imagine something for a second. Picture this. You're sitting in a room, it's probably late, the coffee's gone cold.
Right, always.
And you're staring at a monitor. You've just finished running a script you've been, building for months.
And this isn't, just some simple Python script.
No. This is a digital fortress, a massive quantum circuit. We are talking about 125 qubits.
Which is a huge number.
A huge number, all woven together into this complex three-dimensional lattice. You've sent this absolute beast of a code to the cloud to run on the bleeding edge of technology IBM's newest quantum processors.
The best hardware money can buy, essentially.
Exactly. You hit enter, you wait, and then the data starts trickling back.
And in this case, the data comes back looking, well, it looks beautiful.
It looks perfect. Textbook perfect.
Okay.
The entropy, the randomness you're looking for is maxed out. Statistically, it's flawless.
Parity is balanced. Everything checks out.
It looks, for all the world, like you have just done it. You've hit the holy grail. You've built a shield that protects quantum information from the chaos of the universe.
Right. And for most people, this is it. This is the moment.
This is when you pop the champagne. You call the PR department. You start drafting the Nature paper claiming victory.
But our protagonist today, he didn't do that.
No, he didn't. And that is what makes this story, I think, so compelling.
This is a very different kind of story.
Because this isn't about a massive research team at Google or, a 1,000-person division at IBM high-fiving in a glass-walled conference room.
Mm-hmm.
This is a story about a solo operator,
Mm-hmm.
an independent researcher, Joseph Daniel Burke III.
And he's operating out of Dallas, North Carolina.
Yeah, not exactly the heart of Silicon Valley. He's running what he calls the Ghost in the Shell Red Team. And instead of celebrating that perfect-looking data, he decided to do something. Well, something that most of us would find kind of terrifying.
He decided to attack his own work.
He set out, with intention, to prove himself wrong, to falsify his own result.
And what he found is, I think, going to completely change how you think about smart technology. Because it turns out the very things that were designed to save the quantum information were actually the things killing it.
It's a phenomenon called iatrogenic damage.
Which is a medical term, right? It comes from the Greek iatros, which means healer, and genesis, meaning origin.
Brought forth by the healer.
Exactly. Harm caused by the doctor, or in this case, harm caused by the error correction itself.
So today on the deep dive, we are digging into two papers from this independent researcher. One is called Ablations, the other is the Unified paper. We're going to find out how a perfect-looking experiment was actually just what he'd call it, a warm soup of noise.
He did. And why the smartest chip in the world ended up, well, outsmarting itself.
It's a classic detective story.
It really is. But the crime scene isn't some dark alley. It's a superconducting quantum processor cooled to near absolute zero.
Okay, so before we get to the crime scene itself, we have to understand the victim, or I guess the intended victim. We need to talk about the construct, this thing that Burke built. It's called a 5x5x5 torus.
Right. And when you hear torus, you should be thinking donut.
That's what I picture, a donut.
That's exactly right, mathematically. But let's slow down and really visualize this because it's a bit more complex than a glazed ring sitting on a table. I want you to imagine a Rubik's Cube.
Okay, got it. A cube in my mind.
This cube is a grid. It's got 5 points going across, 5 points going down, and it's 5 points deep. So that gives you 5 times 5 times 5.
125 points in total, 125 qubits.
Exactly. So you've got these 125 qubits all arranged in this block. But here is the magic trick, the key part. It's not just a block floating in space with hard edges.
What do you mean hard edges?
Well, think about a normal cube. If you're a qubit sitting on one of the corners, you're kind of lonely. You only have 3 immediate neighbors.
And in the quantum world, loneliness is a bad thing?
It's extremely dangerous. Edges and corners are where errors creep in. It's where you could call it the wind of environmental noise. It blows the hardest because you have fewer neighbors to sort of stabilize you.
Okay, so you want to get rid of the edges.
You want to eliminate them entirely. And to do that, you use something called periodic boundary conditions.
Which is Pac-Man logic.
That is the perfect analogy. It is precisely Pac-Man logic. If you walk off the right edge of the screen, you don't hit a wall, you just poof. You reappear on the left edge.
Go out the top, come in through the
Go
bottom.
out the front face, you pop in through the back face. It creates this seamless closed loop. There are no edges. There are no corners.
So every single qubit in the entire system has the exact same experience.
Yes. The exact same number of neighbors. It creates this beautiful topological uniformity. It's like a tiny closed universe for your data to live in.
All right, I think I'm getting the geometry. It's a donut, but it's made out of a grid that's all folded in on itself.
You've got it.
But here's the part that just breaks my brain a little bit. The actual hardware, these IBM chips, they're flat. They're silicon wafers.
Yeah, very much 2D.
So how on earth do you build a three-dimensional donut on a completely flat chip?
This is where the engineering gets. I mean, it's just so clever.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, Burke is doing this solo. He's hand-coding this. This is not some drag-and-drop GUI. We're talking about writing, I think it was 44,000 lines of quantum assembly code.
44,000. That's dedication bordering on obsession.
A little bit of both. I think that's where the magic usually happens. So
Right.
to get that third dimension, the depth, the z-axis, he uses time. He calls it a synthetic dimension.
Okay, hold on. We have to unpack that. Synthetic dimension. That sounds like something straight out of sci-fi. You're telling me he's trading a dimension of space for the dimension of time?
It sounds like it, doesn't it? But think of it like a CT scan. The CT scan takes 2D slices of your brain, right? One slice, then another, then another.
Right, a stack of flat images.
A stack of flat images. But when you put all those slices together in a computer, you get a full 3D model of your brain.
Ah, I see where you're going.
Burke is doing that, but he's doing it live, inside the quantum circuit.
So instead of having physical layers of qubits stacked on top of each other, he's got layers in history.
Exactly. Let's say layer 1 of the cube happens at microsecond 0. He entangles all the qubits on the 2D chip, that's the bottom of our cube. Then he measures them, he resets them, and he entangles them again in a different pattern at, say, microsecond 10. That's layer 2.
So the z-axis, the vertical height of this cube, is literally the timeline of the experiment.
Yes. Up is the future. Down is the past. And by linking the measurement of now to the entanglement operation of 10 microseconds ago, he creates a virtual bond. It acts exactly like a physical wire would.
But that seems so incredibly risky, because if your timing is off by just a tiny fraction,
It all falls apart. You don't just lose a pixel, you shatter the entire geometry. If the timing is off, the bottom of the cube disconnects from the top, and your whole beautiful torus it unravels into nothing.
and he does this for how many layers?
1,584 layers deep.
Wow.
It's a skyscraper made of time, built on a foundation of just 125 physical qubits.
And this whole thing is running on IBM's best chips, the Heron processors. But there's a catch, isn't there? You mentioned it's a stress test.
There is a very significant catch. He's running it for way, way too long.
Okay, define too long in the quantum world.
Well, the coherence time, that's basically the battery life of a qubit before it sort of dissolves to noise. It's about 150 microseconds on these particular chips.
150, okay.
This circuit takes nearly 1.6 milliseconds to run.
Do the math for me there. That's more than 10 times.
It's 10 times past its expiration date. He is deliberately driving the car 100 miles after the fuel light has been blinking. Why? I mean, why build something so complex and run it for so long if you know the hardware isn't rated for it? What's the point?
That was the point. That was the mission. The central hypothesis was, can this specific topological structure, this 5 by 5 by 5 torus with all its loops and symmetries, can it suppress errors so effectively that it can survive?
Can the geometry save the data even when the hardware itself is dying?
That's the question. And this is what brings us to part 2, the mirage. Because when he first got that data back, it looked like the answer was a resounding yes.
It looked, as you said, startlingly good.
It really did. He ran it on 2 different chips, one named Torino and one named Marrakesh. And the very first thing any researcher is going to look at is entropy.
Which is, in simple terms, is the output random?
Pretty much. And for this kind of work, cryptography or complex simulations, you want maximum randomness. You want to use the whole alphabet. You don't want the computer just printing AAAA over and over.
Right, because if it's predictable, it's not useful. And it's probably not very quantum. Exactly. A quantum computer that's biased, that prefers zeros over one shoulds, it's broken. You want a perfectly uniform distribution. And on that Torino chip, the normalized entropy value came back as 1.000000.
6 decimal places of perfection.
Absolute, total perfection. He ran 50,000 shots, which means he ran the whole experiment 50,000 times, and he got 50,000 unique results. Not a single collision, no repeats.
And the parity.
Perfectly balanced. It wasn't favoring outcomes that were even or odd. It was smack down the middle.
So if I'm Burke, I'm sitting in that lab in North Carolina, I'm looking at that screen, and I'm thinking, I did it.
I've done it.
I've built a structure that can survive the noise. I've beaten the coherence limit.
And that right there, that is the trap. That is the dangerous moment of self-deception in science. Because yes, high entropy and balanced parity are signs of a working, complex quantum code, but they're also signs of something else entirely.
And what else produces perfectly random, balanced output?
A bucket of warm soup.
A bucket of warm soup.
Total, undifferentiated thermal chaos. Just noise. Think about it this way. If I have a library and it's perfectly organized by the Dewey Decimal System, that is a state of low entropy. It's ordered.
Makes sense.
But if I have a book written in an alien language that is so complex I can't understand a single word, to me, that book looks like random gibberish. It looks like high entropy.
But it actually contains deep structured information.
Exactly. A perfect quantum state is like that alien book. It looks random to us because it's maximally complex and entangled, but what if I just burn the library down? The pile of ashes that's left over also looks pretty random.
So total chaos looks a lot like perfect complexity from a distance.
That's the null hypothesis he had to fight. If 125 qubits just lose their instructions, if they forget everything they were told to do and just start flipping randomly like coins, you also get perfect entropy. You also get balanced parity.
So Burke is holding this pile of digital ashes, and he has to figure out if it's just ashes or if it's the most complex book ever written.
And because his initial metrics, the entropy and the parity, couldn't tell the difference, he almost fooled himself. He was looking at the wreckage of his experiment and was about to call it a masterpiece.
But he didn't stop. He started digging deeper. And this is where the story splits in two. We get this tale of 2 chips, you mentioned them, Torino and Marrakesh. They're both IBM Heron-class processors, but they aren't identical twins.
No, they're siblings. Torino is the older brother, you could say. It's revision 1 of the chip. Marrakesh is the younger, smarter brother, revision 2. And this is the crucial difference. Marrakesh has a new feature called autonomous noise mitigation.
That sounds like a good thing, like active noise-canceling headphones for your quantum computer.
That's the theory, yes. It uses a specific technique called dynamical decoupling, or DD for short.
Okay, let's break that down. Dynamical decoupling. It sounds very intense.
The concept is actually pretty simple. Imagine a qubit is a spinning top. If you just leave it alone, gravity and friction, or in this case, magnetic noise from the environment, will make it wobble and eventually fall over. That's called dephasing.
Okay, the signal dies.
The signal dies. Dynamical decoupling is like reaching in and giving the top a little tap every few seconds to keep it spinning perfectly upright. The hardware itself sends these tiny microwave pulses, spin left, now spin right, to average out the effects of the noise.
So it's an autopilot system. It's designed to fix errors in real time without the user, without work even having to ask it to.
Exactly. It's baked into the hardware.
So Marrakesh, the newer chip with this fancy autopilot, should perform better.
You would absolutely think so. I mean, all logic dictates that the smarter self-correcting chip should yield a better result. But Burke looked at another metric, something called Hamming weight.
Hamming weight.
Yep.
Okay, that's a measure of how many of the qubits are excited, right?
Yeah.
How many end up as a 1 instead of just relaxing back down to 0.
Correct. And in a perfectly random distribution, that perfect entropy we were just talking about, you'd expect about 50% of your qubits to be 1s and 50% to be 0s.
Like flipping a coin a bunch of times, you get roughly 50% heads, 50% tails.
Precisely. So he looks at the data. On Torino, the older chip without the fancy autopilot, the Hamming weight had dropped to about 0.15. So only 15% of the qubits were managing to stay as 1s.
Which is low. That's not 50%.
It's low, but you have to remember, he's running this thing 10 times longer than he should be. Energy dissipates. Qubits naturally want to relax back to 0. So 15% is bad, but it's kind of understandable given the circumstances.
Okay, so what about Marrakesh, the smart chip?
Marrakesh dropped to 0.075.
Ouch. Half. Only 7.5%.
The signal was dying twice as fast on the better hardware. The chip that was supposed to be actively mitigating noise was actually accelerating the decay of the signal.
And this is when he started looking at the bodies, the dead qubits.
This is where the forensics really begin. He came up with a strict definition for a dead qubit. He defined it as any qubit that ends up as a less than 2% of the time.
So it's basically flatline. It's stuck on 0 and it can't get back up.
It's completely relaxed.
Yeah.
It's out of the game.
All right, let's hear the body count.
On Torino, the older chip, 3 dead qubits.
Okay, 3 out of 125. That's manageable. Not great, but not a catastrophe.
Right. Now, on Marrakesh, the newer, smarter chip, 31 dead qubits.
Whoa. Wait, 31?
31?
That is a massive jump. That's 10 times the mortality rate on the chip that's supposed to be fixing itself.
10 times. And this is where that solo researcher aspect becomes so important. A big corporate team, they might have looked at that and said, huh? Weird. Maybe Marrakesh has a calibration issue today. Let's just use the Torino data for the paper.
Let's ignore the anomaly.
It's outlier data. Let's discard it. Exactly. But Burke, he's the red team. His job is to find the point of failure. So he didn't discard it. He zoomed in, he did the forensics, he looked at where the qubits were dying on the chip.
And this brings us to part 4, the crime scene. Because it turns out they weren't just dying randomly, were they?
No, not at all. If this was just, say, a bad manufacturing run or some random thermal noise hitting the processor, you'd expect the dead qubits to be scattered all over, like sprinkles on a donut.
A dead one over here, another one way over there.
Right. Random noise should produce random failures. It's like static on an old TV screen. It's everywhere and nowhere in particular.
But on Marrakesh, that wasn't what he saw.
Not even close. The failures were clustered. He found one specific contiguous run of 7 dead qubits right in a row. Indices 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, and 76. All dead.
7 in a row.
And another run of 4 a little further down the line. Indices 93 through 96.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here. Couldn't that just be bad luck? You know, maybe he flipped a coin 125 times and just happened to get tails 7 times in a row. It's unlikely, but it can happen.
It can. And Burke, being a careful scientist, thought of that. So he ran a Monte Carlo simulation. He basically told a computer, okay, randomly kill 31 out of 125 qubits for me, do it 100,000 times, and tell me how often you see a cluster of 7.
And the answer was?
The answer was almost never. The probability of that happening by pure chance was less than 0.4%. The p-value was 0.0004.
So this wasn't a coin flip.
This was a sniper.
A sniper taking out one specific city block every single time.
That's a perfect way to put it. And here is the absolute smoking gun. He compared the locations of the dead qubits on Torino with the locations on Marrakesh. The two lists had 0 overlap.
0. Not a single one.
Not a single shared index. Now think about that. If the problem was in his code, if his Torus circuit had some kind of logical flaw that killed certain qubits, it should have failed in the same places on both chips.
Because it's the exact same software.
The exact same software. But it didn't. This was the proof. The failure wasn't in the abstract logic of his circuit. It was in the specific physical interaction between his logic and the hardware of the Marrakesh chip.
So now he's got a real mystery on his hands. The better, smarter chip is killing his circuit in this very specific, non-random, clustered pattern. And that perfect entropy he saw at the beginning, it's looking more and more like a complete lie.
Right. So what do? He decides to ablate the study.
Ablation. That sounds surgical.
It is. It's a term from neuroscience. If you want to figure out what a certain part of the brain does, you remove it, and then you see what the patient can't do anymore.
If you remove a piece and they stop being able to speak, you know that piece was related to speech.
Precisely. Burke decided to do the same thing to his own circuit. He said, okay, I'm going to systematically break my own experiment piece by piece to figure out what's real and what's an illusion.
This is that red team mindset in action. If you can't break it, you don't really understand it. So what was the first piece he cut out?
Experiment number 1, the random control. He wanted to test his beautiful, elegant torus shape. Was that geometry actually doing anything special?
The thing he spent all that time coding.
The thing he spent 44,000 lines of code building. So he kept the size the same, 125 qubits. He kept the depth the same, kept the feedback loop. But he took out the geometry. He just scrambled all the connections randomly. Instead of that beautiful 3D lattice, he made a random spaghetti mess of wires.
Okay, so the prediction here would be, if the torus shape was the magic ingredient creating that perfect entropy, then this random mess should perform worse. The entropy should drop.
That has to be the prediction. That's what he was testing. But when
right.
he ran it, the entropy stayed exactly at 1.0.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a humbling moment, I'm sure. It proved that the high entropy he was so proud of had absolutely nothing to do with his clever donut shape.
It was just a side effect.
It was just a side effect of having a massive, deep circuit. Any big, complicated circuit would do the same thing. It proved that his torus wasn't the source of the randomness. The sheer scale and chaos of the system was.
So that's strike one for his shield theory. The shield isn't what's making it look good. What was experiment 2?
Experiment 2 was stabilizer verification. This was the big one. He wanted to check if there was any actual quantumness left. Was there any entanglement? Was the ghost still in the machine?
We know the entropy is high, but is it the good quantum entropy or the bad thermal entropy from our bucket of soup?
That's the question. So he measured the stabilizers, which are basically the mathematical signatures of the quantum bonds between the qubits, and the result he got back was 0.
0.
A flat 0. The state was, in his words, fully thermalized. After all those cycles, there was no quantum information left at all. It was just classical noise, classical fingerprints.
So it was warm soup, the patient was dead on arrival, and he'd been admiring the beautiful coffin.
He had. It was warm soup, but... and this is the critical twist, it was a very specifically structured soup. And that leads us to the biggest ablation of all, Experiment 3.
This is the one that really turns the whole story on its head.
This is the mind bender. Experiment 3, he looked at the corrections. Remember, the whole point of this circuit is to be an error correction circuit. It's supposed to measure a problem and then apply a logic gate, an X flip or a Z flip, to fix that problem. That's the whole reason it exists.
Right. The core loop is detect the error, then fix the error.
Detect, then fix. So he decided to break that loop. He ran the experiment again. Same torus, same long duration, same chip, the problematic Marrakesh chip. But he turned off the fixes. He let the system measure all the errors, but he told it, don't do anything about them, just watch.
Okay, wait, I need to stop you there. My brain is rebelling against this logic. If you stop fixing errors, the errors should get worse. That seems like a fundamental law of the universe. If I stop taking my medicine, I should get sicker, not healthier.
All conventional logic would dictate that. It's the most counterintuitive control experiment imaginable. But on Marrakesh, when he turned off the software corrections, the number of dead qubits dropped from 31 down to 8.
Hold on. He stopped trying to save them, and more of them survived.
Yes. And not only that, the clustering completely disappeared. The Hamming weight, the signal strength, it went up. Things got objectively better when he stopped trying to fix them.
So the medicine was the poison.
The medicine was the poison. This is the iatrogenic finding in its starkest form. The corrections themselves were the cause of death.
That is just... it's wild. How is that even possible? How does the act of fixing an error cause an even bigger error? You're telling me that turning off the error correction made the system work better. That sounds like saying, I took the brakes off my car and now it's safer.
It does. It absolutely defies logic, but only if you assume the brakes are working correctly in the first place. But what if, for some reason, every time you gently tap the brake pedal, the car's automated anti-lock braking system also slammed the brakes as hard as it could?
You'd skid out of control, you'd crash.
You would crash. And that is a perfect analogy for what was happening on the chip. It comes down to this perfect storm, this catastrophic interference of three things, all happening in a very, very tight time window.
Okay, what are the three ingredients?
Ingredient one, you have the torus connectivity, the loops. This structure forces the same qubits to talk to the same neighbors over and over and over again.
Right, the repetitive structure.
Ingredient two, you have the conditional corrections. That's Burke's software, trying to intervene and flip a qubit to fix an error.
His software doctor.
And ingredient three, you have the hardware dynamical decoupling, DD. That's the Marrakesh chip's own autonomous self-repair system, the hardware doctor.
And the two doctors show up at the same time and start fighting over the patient.
They clash. They clash in a window of about 1 to 5 microseconds. The software sends a command down the wire, hey, qubit 72, you need to flip. At the exact same moment, the hardware's autopilot says, hey, qubit 72 looks a little wobbly, I'm going to pulse it to keep it fresh.
It's two people grabbing the steering wheel at the exact same time.
Bang! You get interference. The two signals combine in a way that's destructive. The correction misfires. Maybe the qubit gets rotated too far. Maybe it gets rotated the wrong way entirely. It's what's called constructive interference of the error. The fix makes it worse.
And because it's a torus.
Because it's a torus, that same qubit is connected to the same neighbors in the very next cycle. So 10 microseconds later, bang, it happens again and again and again, 350 times in a row.
So it's not just one car crash. It's a 350-car pileup on the exact same spot on the highway.
It is a systematic hammering. The qubit literally gets beaten down into the zero state. It just gives up. It dies. And because the physical control lines on the chip are laid out next to each other, this interference, this crosstalk, it bleeds over to the neighbors.
And that's why you get the clustering. That's the run of 7 dead qubits in a row.
That's the city block going dark. It's a cascade failure triggered by the conflict between the two repair systems.
It's just fascinating because it's such a clear conflict between the solo coder, who has this very specific plan, and the corporate hardware, which is trying to be helpful but is just too smart for its own good.
It's the perfect example of what happens when you have two complex feedback loops that are completely unaware of each other's existence. The hardware loop, the DD, and the software loop, Burke's code. They are literally fighting for control of the same physical atoms.
Burke actually found a way to quantify this fight, didn't he? There was a specific metric he used about detection versus correction.
Yes, the detection-correction divergence. This, for me, was the final nail in the coffin. It's brilliant. He looked at the syngem data, which is basically the system's ability to see the errors, and the answer was yes, it could see them just fine. The detection ability only degraded by about 6.7% over the run. The system's eyes were working.
Okay, so it knew what was wrong, but what about the correction part?
The correction part degraded by over 51%.
51%.
The hands were broken. The system knew exactly what was wrong, but every single time it tried to reach out and fix it, the hardware's autopilot slapped its hand away.
That's a 7.7 times difference between seeing and doing. That is a massive gap.
It's huge. And it confirms, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the problem wasn't the noise itself. The problem was the active attempt to fight the noise.
So, where does this leave us? I mean, he built this shield, and it fundamentally failed. The torus didn't protect the data. The experiment, in the traditional sense of the word, failed.
It did. But Burke argues, and I completely agree with him, that this is actually a profound success. He reframes the entire purpose of the experiment. He says the circuit failed as a shield, but it succeeded brilliantly as a microscope.
A noise spectroscope.
Exactly. Think about it. If he had just run a generic random circuit, the noise from this hardware-software conflict would have been smeared out across all the qubits. It would just look like a little bit of extra general fuzz. You wouldn't have seen the pattern.
But because the torus is so rigid and so structured, because it forces those same repetitive interactions over and over,
it acted like an amplifier for that one specific conflict. It made that subtle signal loud and clear.
It's like using a high-contrast dye in a medical scan. It makes the problem area light up.
Yes. And those clusters of dead qubits, that's not a bug, it's a map. It literally tells the IBM engineers exactly where on their chip the control systems are fighting with the user's code. It reveals these hardware-software interference patterns that are completely invisible to all their standard benchmarking tests.
So the failure wasn't random. It was actually tracing the physical anatomy of the chip's control wiring.
The software was effectively mapping the hardware's nervous system by burning it out, region by region.
So by designing a rigorous, structured failure, he revealed a deep architectural flaw in the chip's logic that nobody else would have ever seen.
Precisely. And for an independent solo researcher, that is the gold standard. He didn't just run a script and get a result. He probed the fundamental interaction of the man-made machine.
And this brings us right back to the ethics of the solo researcher, Joseph Daniel Burke III. You said at the very beginning that he set out to attack his own claims.
He did. He opens one of his papers with a sentiment that I think is, well, it's becoming increasingly rare in science. He says, "The obligation to falsify one's own claims is the core of science."
In his first draft, or maybe in a parallel universe where he wasn't quite so rigorous, he could have just stopped. He could have stopped at entropy is 1.0, parity is balanced. He could have published a paper claiming he'd invented a new kind of topological shield.
And let's be honest, plenty of startups would have. They'd be writing the press release. "Our revolutionary algorithm preserves perfect quantum randomness. Invest now."
But he's the ghost in the shell red team. The whole point is to break things. He looked at those 31 dead qubits on Marrakesh and said, this doesn't fit the beautiful story. This is wrong.
And so he published the paper explaining in excruciating detail why his first beautiful interpretation was wrong. That is what intellectual honesty looks like.
It's the difference between seeing what you want to see and seeing what's actually there. It's the difference between celebrating it works and asking the much harder question, how does it work?
And in this case, finding out how it broke was infinitely more valuable to the entire field than pretending that it worked.
So what does this mean for the future of quantum error correction, QEC? Because if we can't trust our systems to face errors without causing new ones, we're kind of stuck, aren't we?
It means that the hardware and the software teams need to start talking to each other. Right now, in many ways, they're estranged. The compiler, the software, sends a list of instructions down to the chip, and the hardware does its own secret maintenance routines in the background without telling anyone.
It's a black box.
It's a black box. And Burke's paper is a powerful call for mitigation-aware compilation. The code, the software, needs to know when the hardware is about to send one of its little DD pulses.
Or the hardware needs to know when to just back off and let the software handle it.
Right, and this is a big ask. He calls for a raw mode on these processors. He's saying that advanced users, people like him who are writing 44,000 lines of quantum assembly, they need to be able to have a switch that says, turn off the autopilot, turn off all the smart features, I'm flying this plane myself.
Do you think the big companies like IBM or Google will ever actually allow that? Giving users that level of raw control seems risky. You could probably damage the chip.
It is risky, but what this paper shows is that not giving them that control is also risky. If the chip is going to try and fix itself, the code needs to know when to pause, when to get out of the way. Otherwise, we're just going to keep crashing these quantum cars. The smart features are great for beginners, but for the pioneers who are pushing the absolute limits, they're not features, they're obstacles.
It's such a powerful lesson. We have this built-in assumption that smarter hardware is always better. We want the chip to handle all the messy stuff for us automatically.
We do.
But in the quantum realm, everything is so fragile. An automated fix isn't just software, it's a physical intervention. It's a microwave laser pulse hitting a tiny supercooled piece of metal. You can't just be throwing those around without coordination.
Sometimes the smartest thing a chip can possibly do is nothing at all. Get out of the way and let the carefully constructed code handle it.
Before we wrap up, I just want to go back to that image of the solo researcher for a moment. Yeah. This guy in North Carolina with just a cloud connection to one of the world's most powerful computers. It really strikes me that this level of deep, forensic, self-critical analysis, that's something that's much harder to do when you have a corporate roadmap to hit or you have shareholders you need to please.
Oh, absolutely. There's a profound freedom in that solo path. You can afford to spend 6 months finding out that your beautiful, elegant donut is actually just a very expensive noise detector.
You can afford to be wrong.
You can afford to be wrong as long as you're honest about it. And frankly, the big labs need people like this. They need the external red teams. They need the people who aren't drinking the company Kool-Aid, who are looking at the ugly data, at the dead qubits, and asking why. Why are there 7 of them in a row right there?
It takes a very brave researcher to build a beautiful construct and then be the first one to take a sledgehammer to it, just to see if it's real.
Especially when that construct looks so perfect from a distance.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on as we finish up. We live in a world of ever-increasing automation. We have AI fixing our grammar as we type. We have cars that stay in their own lanes. We have quantum chips that try to mitigate their own noise. But how much of that apparent success is just masking the underlying chaos? How much of our clean, perfect-looking data is really just that warm soup of noise that's been smoothed over and tidied up by a helpful algorithm that we didn't write and that we can't turn off?
That is the question, isn't it? And until we have more people like Burke who are willing to turn off the safeties and stare directly at the raw, messy data, we might never really know the answer.
Indeed. Well, Joseph Daniel Burke III, if you happen to be listening.
Yeah.
Fantastic work. And to everyone else, keep questioning those perfect results.
Especially the perfect ones.
See you in the next Deep Dive.